Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. This is History is Here to Help. And it's more than history. It's the whole view of the world, okay? With Carl Ackerman, my co-host, and Allison Blakenship, who is going to join us today for discussion of some books. Right after this, we'll be back to drill down on that discussion. Okay, Carl, it's going to be up to you to introduce Allison. And it can be effusive. Effusive is okay.
Well, Jay, sometimes, as I was mentioning to Allison, people come along, and in case of Allison Blakenship, I've known her for a while. She grew up in Hawaii. She was a student at Iolani, went to college in San Diego, and came back to Iolani teaching in a variety of different subjects, and also the star tennis coach, I may add. So this is quite a woman who deals in a variety of things. But most recently, she's been doing a lot of outreach into the Hawaiian community through a wonderful group called KAI. And what KAI does is it takes public school kids and makes them ready to go to college. And almost all of these kids are on free or reduced lunch, which means she's dealing with kids who have not had the advantages that many of the kids at Punahou and Kamehameha and Iolani have. And so, what we're talking about today, that's a good segue, Jay, and I'm going to stop in just a minute to see if you want to ask any more questions, but it's a good segue into what we're going to be talking about today, which is private-public partnerships and the history thereof. But let me add by adding one more thing about Allison. It's always a pleasure to work with Allison because she embodies that spirit of Iolani School, which is always agreeable, understated, and it's like the old George Ariyoshi statement, quiet and effective. And I've always admired Iolani for this, and I can say Iolani no ko'oi.
Oh, well, that was pretty effusive. Allison, I offer you two possibilities here in sequence. One is, what did he miss? Okay, and mind you, we only have half an hour show. And the other is, what would you like to say about Carl? You can be effusive if you like.
Yeah, Carl, he nailed it. I've been lucky to be at Iolani. I think this is now my 13th year and have been doing the KAI programs. We're going into our 14th year. But Carl was the first person on island actually that I met with and reached out to because he was the director of the PUEO program at Punahou. So when we, were getting into this public-private partnership, we had coffee in Manoa. And I distinctly remember that meeting because he was so willing to help, us and Iolani make sure that this partnership was going to be a success. And he's been a great mentor to me throughout the years and always kind of checks in and pushes me professionally, just like this show. I said, I don't think you need me on this. And he said, no, you're coming on this show. So it definitely has helped me, form our program for Iolani. But then also we've worked together in a national, program that helps other schools, other private schools that have public purposes. Yeah.
Okay, there you go, Carl. So now we have the environment is established, and you both have achievements to discuss. Who goes first, Carl?
Carl.
Well, let me just give a little background to private-public partnerships in Hawaii, and then I'm going to hand it to Allison to describe her KAI program, which is really a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful program. And by the way, my mother, who recently passed away, but she passed away at 98, and she had a long, glorious life, always said that she felt that Iolani was the best school in the country. And when I spent a long time at Punahou, I said to her, "Mom, you can no longer say that, especially in front of my good friend Jim Scott." So just to begin, you have to go back to the middle of the 20th century where Miles Carey was the principal of McKinley High School. And what he did was he took public school students, not just from the sort of upper crest of Hawaii, but really told kids that were coming in from plantation families that they could be anything that they can be or that they wanted to be. And if you go to the McKinley High School general administrative building, you'll see the pictures of, it's a who's who of who's, been successful, in Hawaii, including the wonderful local general Robert Lee, the head of Zippies, and the list goes on. It's just it may also be Daniel Inouye.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel Inouye. Yeah.
And politicians. So it's really a remarkable thing that Miles Carey did, and they have a Miles Carey walkway at McKinley, and if you go into their library, there's a whole dissertation that I read about him. But he was the first person that bridged the gap between basically kids coming from the plantations and making them into, or they made themselves into very respectable people. One last thing about Miles Carey, who established, in terms of the contemporary world, private and public entities through his advancing of kids at his school, is when an internment came around, when Japanese Americans were put into concentration camps, he left McKinley and went to one of those concentration camps. It may have been one of the ones in Arizona. I can't remember which. The synapses are not working so well as I get older. But he did do that. So he was wonderful. And then let's shift to the later part of the 20th century, where there were two programs in Hawaii that really catapulted the private public entity. And that was at Mid-Pac School, David Turner, who's now a priest at Church of the Crossroads, and a wonderful artist by the name of Carol Iacovelli, started a summer bridge program, which was precisely a public-private program trying to get kids who were underserved into college. So that was the first. It was really Mid-Pac that started us all. And then Bank of Hawaii, believe it or not, under Larry Johnson, it's now being, aptly led by Peter Ho. But Larry Johnson created a program for 100 kids across the state for 4 years. He basically financed this program. He had Bank of Hawaii employees tutor these kids. And then I think he gave every kid that finished that program a full ride into college. So, it had that private-public partnership was truly unique. And so, Allison and I are disciples of all of these things. And in 2005, as Allison alluded to, we started the PUEO program, which allowed kids eventually to take 7 years at Punahou during the summer and take classes that were for credit and eventually get into college. And this was entirely funded by private donations. It was not initially funded at all by Punahou School, though we had it in kind, but it was funded by donors. Debbie Berger and Bill Reeves came up with their Unbound philanthropy. The Weinberg Foundation came in strongly. Corbett Kalama was a big supporter, as was Galen Wong. And then, there were many other foundations, which were, the Harold K.L. Castle Foundation supported us. And, eventually the greatest foundation for our support was the Clarence T.C. Ching Foundation. And
Carl, we're about halfway through the show.
Okay, so let me get, okay, I better be quick.
Our principal guest get on here.
Yes, okay, so anyway, private-public partnerships, this is the way we were going, and I will end by saying this. It would not have been possible without President Jim Scott, who launched this PUEO program and who was supportive to me during its entire tenure. And Allison Blakenship runs a very similar program with unique features called Ka'i, and I'm going to be quiet now, Jay, on your advice, and let our guest speak.
Whoa. I still don't know what a public-private partnership is and how the experience of the student is different. Can you help us with that, Allison?
Sure. So the programs that I think we are referring to are programs that are between a private school being the host entity and then pulling in public school students. I think every school does it differently. For us at Iolani through Ka'i, we work solely with Palolo Valley. So under-resourced students will be the first in their family, first generation to go to college, who live in Palolo Valley. Most of our kids live in the Palolo public housing. They come into our program. When we began, they came in at 6th grade and we kept them, through high school graduation. So they'd come to Iolani for 6 summers. Now we've grown our program. So now our earliest entry point is preschool. So we are trying to get 3-year-olds who live in the Palolo public housing to come into our preschool program. And then now we have an elementary program as well, middle and high school, and then a college program. So really trying to, when we talk about public-private partnerships, it's both entities bringing resources to the table, right? We work very closely with Jarrett Middle School, and they have been a phenomenal partner. And when we started, the principal there was just this amazing woman. Her name is Donna Lum. And she said, we have these kids during the school year, and Jarrett does an amazing job with these kids. But during the summer, there are very few opportunities for them. So that could be a place that you folks come in, and then we have this wraparound, support program for these kids. And so
this is to help kids who are disadvantaged.
Yep, low income.
Who are presumably in the public school system.
Yes.
You bring them into the private schools, and you give them the benefit of the private school education. Is that what it is?
And primarily closing the summer learning loss that low-income students typically experience, right? So there's every research ever done shows that low-income and better-off kids persist at the same rate, academically during the school year, but over the summer, better-off students have opportunities. Summer school, they're going on trips with their families and so forth, whereas low-income students don't have those opportunities, and they typically fall behind 2 to 3 months in math and English, which is not a lot in one summer, but summer after summer, that's years in losses.
Yeah,
right?
So the program includes both the academic year and the summer as well.
Yes.
And it is funded by contributions from underwriters and donors and the like who pay the tuition and the expenses of these kids who are low income.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, that Allison, honestly, that accentuates the problem in Hawaii, that public schools don't offer the same level of education, I'm sorry to say, you can argue with me, as the private schools do. And wouldn't the answer be also, I'm not saying exclusively, but also to do a better job of the public schools? I mean, spend more money on them,
of course.
Recruit, high quality faculty and all that. And then this wouldn't necessarily be all that essential if the two schools were at a parity, right from the get-go. No?
Absolutely. I will say, though, working with kids in poverty, so I think the academic piece, it started as that was the biggest thing we did. It's classes during the summer. But now we say we don't call it academic programs, we call it comprehensive support, because when we've been working with that community for 14 years now. And so in addition to the academics, and you're absolutely right, that would be the actual solution, not a Band-Aid, right? But for our programs specifically, we go a lot more in depth than any school can, right? So we do emergency relief funding. We pay rent and utilities for our families, especially during the pandemic, right?
You give them lunch?
Yeah, of course, and breakfast. And then we do full college scholarships for our kids. So something that neither Iolani or the DOE can do, right? So we look at how hard is it to get out of poverty, and it's very hard. It's an average of 5 generations, right, in the United States.
And that means when you say average, you mean that some families never get out of.
That's generational poverty.
How do you select these kids? They're lucky kids. How do you select them? Is it on the basis of merit? Is it on the basis of need? Is it a combination?
For our program, they have to be at or below the poverty line, their families. They are the first generation of their family to go to college. And then specifically for Ka'i, they have to be what we call in the academic middle. So we don't take the top A students. Those kids will be fine. We don't take the failing students. There's a lot of support programs for them. We take those in the academic middle, who, 2/3 of them will drop out of high school, but with support, they do very well. So our kids, when we look at our grade, distribution of our kids, it's going to be mostly C's, some D's, some F's, maybe a B and A here and there, but we're looking for those kids who are like 2 to 3 grade levels behind, so that the summer program can bolster their academic achievement.
How many kids in absolute numbers are in this program?
Yeah, so in all of our programs together, it's 170. That's from preschool through college, not counting alumni.
Is there a way for you to accommodate more, or is it limited by the scope of the schools that you're bringing them into?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We're expanding our program, so we'll be at 240 over the next few years. But it's always a question for us of, do we go very deep, which we know is really needed when we talk about the 5-generation thing. We can't think that by doing a summer program, we're getting kids out of poverty, right? So we prefer in our programs to go really deep with the amount of support and longevity we give to our students. We are expanding, but we'll never say we're going to have 1,000 kids, because we know that we'll have a lot of breadth, but not a lot of depth.
Yeah. Do you have a payback kind of arrangement where the kid has the benefit of this, special public-private arrangement, and then the kid comes back and talks to the new entries and shares with them how this helped him?
Yeah, we have mentors. A lot of them are mentors in our program, or they come back to work for the program. But for us, particularly because we're with one community, Palolo, it's so powerful, right? Because it's when our young kids see our older Ka'i kids graduate from high school, go on to college, graduate from college, that's much better than us saying you should go to college, you should graduate from college, right? So, and Carl, I think, had this exact same thing with PUEO, right? Where his older kids.
You were familiar with both programs, having worked with Carl before. What's the difference?
Carl, do you want to speak to that? I can speak to it, but you know better.
Well, we're going to get to Carl.
Okay. The difference, I guess, Punahou is huge, right? PUEO, I think I think that they take, a student from each of the middle schools. So that might be 50 plus students, right? So they're working with middle schools across the state, whereas we chose to just be with one community of Palolo Valley.
Got it.
Yeah.
So what about you, Allison? I mean, teachers, and you strike me as a person who would be a wonderful teacher. I'd like to be in your class. If I was younger, much younger. But what do you get out of this? You're managing the program. Are you also teaching? Where's the gratification for you?
Oh, there's a ton of gratification. I love my job. The gratification for me is being able to bridge the resources that Iolani has, or the resources we can get from foundations, with an under-resourced community, right? I had a similar experience when I was in college in San Diego, working at a charter school right with the border of Mexico. And it's not rocket science. It's if you give a lot of resources, like everything that Iolani kids get, resources, facilities, support. Of course, these kids, they're phenomenal kids. They're going to finally have access and opportunity, right? So yeah, every day there's gratification for me. It's just, yeah.
One thing that strikes me, and then I will go on to Carl, is that, so you think a low-income kid comes from, maybe a hard scrapple background.
Yeah.
And you take a kid at a private school, he comes from a nice, sweet background and all that, and you put them together in a class. There's really no distinction there, going through the same programs.
Yeah.
Now, how does that work? In other words, if I send my kid to Harrow, for example, he's going to meet some of the wealthiest, most international figures you could imagine. And at the end of his education at Harrow, he's going to be elbow to elbow with these people. He's going to be in their social group as well as their academic group. Is that what happens here? Or is it some other phenomenon?
So that's a great question. We find that putting them in class together is really good for both sides, right? They form friendships, and our kids come back year after year, so they like each other. Our Ka'i kids also see, I can definitely be right there with the Iolani students. Our teachers love our Ka'i kids because they appreciate the opportunity, but they're also sometimes more outgoing than Iolani students, right? And they're hungry for the opportunity. I think though, that point that you made about the network, right, that propels so many people, and it's not maybe earned, but you have some sort of a network, similar to me being an Iolani grad and being able to say, I went to Iolani, so now I have this connection with you that I didn't earn. It's just it's an unearned advantage. That's what we're trying to build with our Ka'i students who don't actually have access otherwise to that network, right? So building that, and that's a privilege that you just get because you get to be a part of, Iolani or Punahou or some sort of better off community, right? So I like that part the most, that we can then call on our Iolani network to hook our Ka'i students up with a job or get support where they might need it. That's one of my favorite parts of the job.
Yeah, the connection is so important. When I was a kid, I went to a Jewish Federation camp in New York, and and fully a third, maybe more of the kids at the camp were low-income families on scholarships from the camp because it was a nonprofit. And it was wonderful to see them.
Yeah,
together.
exactly. Form really good friendships, and you wouldn't know really the difference, right? So,
Yeah.
good
So,
for everyone.
Carl, this is a great model that PUEO and also what Allison is doing. My question is, and you and I have discussed this in the past, how does this work on the mainland nationally? Shouldn't we have this kind of arrangement, this public-private partnership arrangement, where you connect the communities, so to speak, you connect the financial circumstances together, and you build sort of a polyglot community that works better for everybody? Is this happening on the mainland? Can we export this? Should we export it? Have we exported it?
Jay, the answer is yes. And Allison referred to this because she's now a director of the organization. It's called Private Schools of Public Purpose. The name has changed a bit, but it's still PSBP. And that's its purpose. It's to actually promote these private-public partnerships. And what we mean by private-public partnerships, Jay, is, in a sentence or two, is, getting kids who are faced with poverty or challenges economically and giving them, as Allison so eloquently said, an even playing field. And I think that, what we've been doing, and Allison's been expanding her program, and the 7-year program that I started, the current director, Iolani Scullion at Punahou, is expanding it and going and starting, instead of at 5th grade, which we began, going all the way through high school, starting it even at younger grades and stuff. And Jay, you mentioned, the comparison between, Punahou and Iolani. We always must, and public education, we always must remember that, kids are paying over $20,000 a year to go to those schools. And so it's a way of paying back. And you might think, well, are the private schools ever get paid from the public sector? And, we recently had the Punahou Carnival, and all those funds go to the senior class and for scholarships for Punahou kids. So, this private-public partnership is meant largely in what Allison, I, and others on the mainland through Private Schools of Public Purpose are doing, is to promote and help public education. And it's always unfair to compare the public schools with private schools, even though we want to get high academic success at all schools, because the public schools deal with many issues, including kids who are disabled, kids who come from abject poverty, and that's when I was at Punahou, there were parties, Jay, for my daughters, where they would attend these parties where they're at country clubs, and that's just, and my daughters would come home. This is an interesting story. I think Allison, who has 2 children herself, it was interesting. My kids would say, "Oh, could we have it?" And I said, "No, we're going to Kaimana Beach. That's where that's where good parties are." Anyway, so the comparison between public and private, you always have to figure out where the funds are coming. But still, CAI in particular is wonderful. And what's unique about CAI is that you have the founding director and the person who created everything in Allison. And now I'll be quiet again.
There's always a problem of succession, Allison. Every time you see a founding director, you know that you have to consider succession. Mm-hmm. What's the plan, Allison?
We're lucky we have such a good team. We really have just an amazing team that so many of our team have been with us for the whole time, 14 years or 10 years or 9. So far, none of us are leaving. And we have we have a long-term plan for CAI and our partners. I think it's, for us, we're particularly lucky because we have one community we work with. So we're super invested in that community. We feel like personally responsible. And we have really good partners in that community. So as long as Iolani will have me, I'll be doing this job.
No, Iolani is a better school than Punahou, right? We all know that. Yeah. Sorry, Carl.
Now we're going a little bit too far.
Don't tell Jim Scott I said that. Okay, but Carl. I mean, you guys are educators, and you spent your careers, at least in large part, making programs like this work. And so, do you talk to Carl about it? Do you coordinate and collaborate and share lessons and ideas and plans between, Kai and PUEO?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually just at the PUEO office a couple of weeks ago to stop in and just, we just caught up with what are you folks, what's the challenge right now? What are you doing about this? Definitely in the pandemic, one of the first people I called was the director of PUEO, Kehao, to just say, what are you folks doing? Are you doing an online program? How are you going to get your kids on, Zoom classes? What about buses, these things? So, and that's part of the network that Carl started, PSPP, was exactly that. We have an annual conference. And for me, that conference is go to all the directors and ask as many questions as I can, and then offer support to other directors as well.
Yeah, good. Because it's really a state, and although you're in one community, it's a statewide effort for sure. And that takes me to a question to you, Carl. So you have certain donors, underwriters, contributors, who provide funding for both of these programs. And I wonder, to me, I see this as something the legislature could help with. Is the legislature helping with it?
Jay, when we first started PUEO, we were in a building, and what we were doing is we were getting free lunches from Washington Intermediate, and the head of the vice president in terms of finance at PUEO found out about this and said, "Oh my goodness!" Because once you accept federal or state funds, you're subject to all sorts of bureaucratic rules and regulations. So we discontinued that pretty quickly, and the Punahou cafeteria took over. But we have not. I don't know of Punahou ever accepting any kind of public funding for this. But we do have partnerships with the DOE where they can do things in kind and things like this. But it's because of our funders, and that's where I started, and should have probably started with the definition which Allison so eloquently stated. But without
That's
these
okay.
funders,
We find our way. We find our way
this is right,
the whole story.
Anyway, but the significance of this and the significance of the funding is really important. But it is a credit to both Punahou and Iolani administrators. That is the top administrators from Tim Cottrell to Michael Latham, that they're willing to give the resources for this. Yeah. And it's also a great credit to the various superintendents, going back to Kathy Matayoshi, et cetera, and to the current most wonderful Superintendent Keith Hayashi, who had wonderful programs at Waipahu himself.
What about the federal government? Either of you getting support from the federal government? No. The other thing that strikes me is that if I'm a public spirited citizen, I say to myself, I love this program. I love the idea of putting the two income groups together, if you will. Maybe that's oversimplified, but I love the idea of helping low-income families. I want them to have a better life, and I want them to go home and tell their parents about it, and I want them to go home and tell their friends about it. Show how the other side lives. Give them aspirations they wouldn't otherwise have. Okay? So if I'm a public spirited citizen, I would like to be an underwriter myself. I would like to be a supporter myself. Do you have that? Can I go on a website for either of these programs and make a contribution? And is the contribution tax deductible? I assume you're both educational 501c3s, right? Right? I mean, you're getting public support. Do you think you could get more public support, and how? You, Allison, first.
Yeah, we're under Iolani's 501c3 umbrella. And so, and then we have Iolani has designated all the Aloha United Way donations, instead of going to Iolani School, goes to Ka'i. And then we, I guess through the grapevine, we just are on the radar of people in our community who want to support the initiatives. Yeah.
Yeah, and Carl, if I go to the Punahou Carnival, assuming I can find a parking spot within 6 miles, there's an issue about that. We should have another show about that. And I do I buy a hero sandwich. It's my favorite thing at the Punahou Carnival. Is part of that money going to go to the PUEO program, or is that scholarship money only for Punahou kids?
Jay, when I was director and still employed by Punahou, and I can't speak for the last 2 years because that's really, I'm embarking on both Mike Latham and my wonderful successor, Kehau. I can't speak for that, but no, it only went for scholarship for Punahou kids and it went to help the senior class in their graduation ceremonies. But I'm very proud to tell you, Jay, that when I retired, a professor from Arizona State named Laura Keiko Gila Ackerman started an endowment for the PUEO program under my name and my wife's name, and my wife, Lynn Ackerman, worked in the DOE for years and had a terrific career in the DOE. So there's the Carl and Lynn Ackerman endowment fellowship. So if people want to contribute to PUEO, they could contribute directly to that fellowship and then that endowment. But let me just say this also about, because you asked about the relationship between Iolani and Punahou. When the PUEO program was, we started in 2005. We got to more than 300 kids per year, which was wonderful. But what happened was when we were going into like our fourth or fifth year and we didn't have enough room on campus in our summer school for the kids to take SAT, Valley Washita, the headmaster of Iolani, stepped up and gave us tremendous discounts along with someone who was involved, the head administrator, Ann Yanashige, because he understood the significance of this program. So a lot of people always, have rivalries between schools and things like this, but not with PUEO and with Ka'i and with other programs. There's a program now at Sacred Hearts also, and it's a real credit to Val Washita to see the value of this, and also Jim Scott. And I have to go back to Jim for just a second. He was a kid that needed to go to Punahou on scholarship, and he remembers working in the cafeteria and serving his friends because he didn't have a lot of money. And so I think it's not a coincidence that PUEO grew up and flourished under President Jim Scott's tenure, and he also embodies that George Ariyoshi statement about quiet and effective.
Allison, Kamehameha Schools has a scholarship program for dentists, and they'll send somebody out of Kamehameha Schools to the mainland to study dentistry. I don't think there's a dental school here, and they pay the freight. Okay?
Right.
But when these kids come back, no longer kids. If you're a dentist, you're not a kid. I don't want a kid working in my clinic anyway. When they come back, okay, KS says to them, look, we want you to serve the community. That means the Native Hawaiian community. It means the neighbor islands. It means the rural communities. So there is a quid pro quo for that, for the fact they spent money. And is there a quid pro quo for either PUEO or Ka'i, where you give them a scholarship, you do all kinds of good things for them over a long period of time sometimes, where you say to them, we want you to pay the community back, and we don't want you leaving and living in Idaho. We don't want that. We want you to at least be here. What do you have in the way of a program along those lines?
Yeah, we don't have anything formal that says you have to do this because we did this for you. And in my mind, the quid pro quo is you come back and you be a positive, engaged citizen. That's enough. You are in poverty, and that because of a lot of unfair circumstances. So you get out of poverty and you live a healthy, productive life. You are giving back, right? But for us, because we're just with one community, we have so many siblings, so many cousins. So to me, their giving back is what they're telling their younger brother, their younger sister, their cousin, their niece of, you need to stay in school, you need to get to Ka'i on time, all those things that happens for us. And it makes it so much more successful for us. So
I agree. I asked you the question, but your answer swallows the question. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Carl, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, we want to keep these kids here. Are these programs useful in doing that?
I think they are, and for the reasons that Allison so eloquently put, I don't have to say anything else except for that. Jim Scott spoke to both Punahou students and to PUEO kids, and what he said is, to whom much is given, much is expected, that old, sort of New Testament dictum. And I think they got it. And a lot of what really warmed my heart was a particular family named Wong, Huang. The parents couldn't speak very good English. They came from Vietnam. They had 5 children. All 5 children went into the PUEO program. And the oldest, I have a picture right about a foot away from me right now of the oldest graduating Christy, who went through the PUEO program from Princeton. And she is standing hand in hand or shoulder to shoulder with my oldest daughter, who was there as a postdoc. But those 5 kids, are going to make it, and their trajectory has changed. Mm-hmm. Their trajectory in life has changed, and there is a wonderful history teacher. I'm not going to name him. Allison will know who I'm talking about because he's in the middle grades. And he is a powerful influence. The yearbook was dedicated to him not too long ago. But he said, it's not what you do for the kids, is what they do for you.
It sounds like the Kennedy inauguration speech.
Yes, it's
Allison,
Allison,
just would you mind whispering the name of that individual to me?
I think it's Ellen Somori.
I was not going to mention his name. I didn't want to embarrass him, but Allison did. There we go.
Okay, time for closing arguments, as the case may be. So, Allison, can you give us your takeaway that you'd like people to remember you and this show by, and any further rebuttal you'd like to make to anything that Carl said?
I think the biggest takeaway is that to raise the level of education or to achievement in our community, it has to be everyone at the table, right? So it's not DOE and then private schools and then private entities. It takes everybody, right? The new preschool initiative is a great example of that. It cannot just be, the DOE or the Executive Office on Early Learning. They need, private partners in there, and it has to be everybody at the table. That's what I love about these programs. There's bridges where there otherwise wouldn't be. And to me, that's what it takes in Hawaii.
Yes, absolutely. It's central, isn't it? To the Hawaii thing.
Yeah,
the essential spirit of the state.
Absolutely.
Carl, okay, you get to give your final comments, and you can rebut anything that Allison said, or you can add to it, and you can make a comparison between the schools in your way, and try to leave a message with people that they will remember going forward.
Jay, I'm a proud UC Berkeley grad, and one of my nieces, both are great schools, and I think that there are many good schools. But I think one of the things that Hawaii has had is incredible leadership, both by Jim Scott, by Tim Cottrell, by Valley Washita, of course, by the legend at Iolani, David Kuhn, Betty White at Sacred Hearts, and all these people, and Michael Chun at Kamehameha. Michael Chun, what a wonderful man. And I was privileged to give an introduction to him not too long ago for him. When you have leaders like this, and Corbett Kalama from the Weinberg Foundation, now with locations, when you have leaders like this that get it because they grew up in a certain way, then the possibility of Ka'i, PUEO, the Sacred Hearts program, the program that's just being started on the Big Island, it's a possibility because they remember what the odds were against them, and all of them succeeded and are doing well. And I think it's really a credit to them. And then having people like Allison and people like Kealoha Scullion, Kehaulani Kealoha Scullion, just to get the name right, implementing. And I think that's the trick. And Barbara G on the mainland. You asked about the mainland. Steve Filosa in Boston. Barbara G in Oakland. MJ Thorne in Atlanta. All of these people are doing similar things. I hope the people out
there are taking notes because you're giving them a lot of information. Carl, so just to close this up, how do you think Allison did today?
Listen, Jay. It's like asking me about my daughter. So Allison always does well, and she has a heart of gold. And this is a woman who is managing Ka'i when she has 2 young children, and she and her husband are doing a marvelous job. And I'm not sure I could have done PUEO when when my children were the ages that Allison has children. So she's, Allison is quite remarkable. And Jay,
Okay,
last time
I got it.
wait,
We
wait,
got
no,
it.
you
We
have
all
no, you
got
have
it.
to
We
hear
all
wait,
got it.
what
We're
African
running out of
American.
time.
Okay,
Carl.
I'm going to give you
So
one
I have to
sentence.
yeah, okay.
One sentence.
Yeah.
We had the teacher of African American studies on not too long ago, Russell Motter, and he cannot use enough superlatives to describe Allison Blakenship. Now I'll end.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. No, okay, Allison. To be fair is fair, how do you think Carl did today?
Yeah, I think Carl has, from the beginning, been relentless about, and not the beginning of the show, but since he started this work, been relentless about getting people on board with this idea for public-private initiatives, not just in Hawaii, but nationally. And he's the number one champion for them. And so he'll help any new director get started and make sure they're successful and make sure they have connections. Yesterday, he just called me to tell me about a new foundation that I should be looking at for funding. So even though he's retired from PUEO, he's just constantly doing this work, and we need people like him. So I'm grateful.
Did it ever occur to you that he cannot help himself?
And that's a good thing, yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you, Carl Ackerman. Thank you, Allison Blakenship. Really appreciate the discussion.
Thanks.
Aloha.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.